The last night I slept at a bus station, my little sister was shivering in my arms. We had $23 and a book of poetry. 48 hours later, I was holding $60,000 in cash and a map that a corporation would do anything to possess. But I need to start at the beginning. At the moment everything fell apart so that something new could finally begin. The morning smelled like industrial disinfectant and powdered eggs. The same smell that had greeted me for 2.5 years at St. Augustine's group home for children in Lincoln, Nebraska. I had learned to breathe through my mouth during meals, to tune out the scrape of plastic trays and the low hum of fluorescent lights that never quite stopped buzzing. My name is Ren Bennett. I was 18 years old, and in approximately 4 hours I would become homeless. I did not know that yet. What I knew was that my sister Sparrow was late for breakfast, and that made my stomach clench with a particular anxiety that had become my constant companion since our parents died. Sparrow was 14. She had our mother's brown eyes and our father's stubborn chin, and she carried a book of poetry everywhere she went. Not just any book. A slim volume of verse by an obscure poet named Genevieve Rain, its cover worn soft as cloth from years of handling. Our grandfather had given it to her the last time we saw him, 3 years ago, at our parents' funeral. That book was the only thing we had left of our family. The state had taken everything else. The house where we grew up, the furniture that still smelled like our mother's perfume, the photographs that had not been digitized, the ones of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and lazy summer afternoons. All of it liquidated to pay debts we did not know existed. I remember the day they came for us. Two social workers in sensible shoes, carrying clipboards and speaking in soft voices that were supposed to be comforting, but felt like sandpaper against my grief. They told us we were going somewhere safe. They told us everything would be all right. They lied. St. Augustine's was not safe. It was a holding pen, a warehouse for children that nobody wanted. The building itself was over 100 years old, a former Catholic orphanage that had been converted into a state facility. The walls were painted that particular shade of institutional green that seemed designed to drain the color from everything, including hope. There were 43 children living there when Sparrow and I arrived. 43 stories of abandonment, abuse, neglect. Some of the kids had been in the system their whole lives, shuffled from foster home to foster home again until they stopped believing that anywhere could be permanent. Others, like us, had arrived suddenly, their lives upended by tragedy or circumstance. We learned quickly that there were rules at St. Augustine's. Not the official rules, the ones posted on the bulletin board about curfews and chores and mandatory therapy sessions. The real rules, the ones that determined whether you survived or became prey. Rule 1, keep your head down. Don't draw attention. Don't stand out. Rule 2, protect what's yours, because if you don't, someone will take it. Rule 3, trust no one. Not the staff, who were overworked and underpaid and rotated out every few months. Not the other kids who were fighting their own battles for survival. Not even yourself, because hope was the most dangerous thing of all. For 2.5 years, I followed those rules. I kept my head down in classes, earned decent grades, stayed out of trouble. I worked the system, learned which staff members could be manipulated and which ones were genuinely trying to help. I counted down the days until I turned 18, until I could walk out those doors and never look back. But Sparrow was different. She couldn't harden herself the way I did. She still believed in goodness, still found beauty in things, still read her poetry book every night before bed like a prayer. She was too soft for this place, and that softness made her a target. I lost count of how many times I had to intervene. The stolen lunch money, the torn homework, the cruel nicknames whispered just loud enough to hear. Each time I stepped in, used whatever leverage I had to make it stop. Each time I made a new enemy, but I kept her safe. That was all that mattered, until the morning of my 18th birthday, when everything fell apart. I found Sparrow in the common room, and the scene that greeted me turned my blood to ice. A girl named Dakota, 17 and built like a refrigerator, had the poetry book in her meaty fist. She was holding it above her head, laughing, while Sparrow jumped and grabbed at it like a desperate puppy. "Give it back," Sparrow's voice cracked. "Please, it's all I have." "All you have?" Dakota mimicked in a cruel, high-pitched whine. Poor little orphan girl. Maybe if you cry, I'll feel sorry for you. The other girls in the common room had formed a loose circle around them. Some were laughing. Others looked away, grateful that they weren't the target this time. None of them moved to help. That was how it worked at St. Augustine's. You didn't intervene. You didn't make yourself a target. You survived. I was across the room before I made a conscious decision to move. My hand closed around Dakota's wrist, squeezing hard enough to make her gasp. Drop it. Dakota's eyes narrowed. She was bigger than me, heavier, and she had a reputation for fighting dirty. But I had something she did not. I had spent 2.5 years learning every weakness, every pressure point, every secret shame of everyone in this building. I had nothing left to lose. Or what? She sneered, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. Or I break your wrist, and then I break your nose, and then I tell Mrs. Patterson exactly what you've been doing in the supply closet with her husband's prescription medication. The room went silent. Dakota's face went pale. The book fell to the floor. Sparrow snatched it up, clutching it to her chest like a lifeline. Dakota shoved me backward, hard. I stumbled into a table, caught myself, and then the world went sideways because Dakota's fist connected with my jaw. After that, it was chaos. Girls screaming, Sparrow crying. Someone pulled the fire alarm. By the time Mrs. Patterson arrived with 2 security guards, Dakota and I were both bleeding, and the common room looked like a tornado had passed through it. The hearing, if you could call it that, took less than 15 minutes. Mrs. Patterson sat behind her desk with her reading glasses perched on her nose and her mouth pressed into a thin line of disappointment. I had seen that expression many times over the years. It was the look of someone who had long ago stopped expecting anything good from the children in her care. Ren, you're 18 now, legally an adult. We cannot keep you here after an incident of this severity. She attacked my sister. She stole. We have multiple witnesses who say you started the physical altercation. Of course they did. Dakota had friends. I had Sparrow. You have until noon to collect your belongings. Your final stipend has been deposited to your account. I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream that this was not fair, that I had spent 2.5 years keeping my head down and following every ridiculous rule, that I had protected Sparrow the only way I knew how. But I had learned in the system that wanting did not matter. That fair was a word for people who had families, homes, someone to fight for them. What about my sister? Mrs. Patterson sighed, the sound of someone being asked to solve a problem that was not her concern. Sparrow is a minor. She will remain in our care until— No! The word came from the doorway. Sparrow stood there, her poetry book still clutched to her chest. Her eyes red, but her jaw set in that stubborn way that reminded me so painfully of our father. I'm not staying here without Ren. Sparrow, you don't have a choice. Then I'll run away. Every day. Every single day until I turn 18. You'll spend more money trying to find me than it would cost to just let me go. Mrs. Patterson's mouth opened and closed. For a long moment, the only sound was the buzz of those fluorescent lights. I watched the calculation happen behind her eyes. The paperwork involved in a runaway. The liability. The phone calls to social workers and police and supervisors. The headache that Sparrow was promising to become. Fine. The word came out like she was spitting poison. Fine. But when you're living on the streets, don't come crying to me. We walked out of St. Augustine's with one backpack between us, $23 in cash, and a bus station as our only destination. The Lincoln bus station at night was a particular kind of purgatory. The hard plastic seats were designed to prevent sleeping, all awkward angles and armrests placed specifically to ensure maximum discomfort. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a slightly different frequency than the ones at St. Augustine's, but the effect was the same: institutional, inhuman, the lighting of places where no one wanted to be. It was March, and the Nebraska wind cut through the station every time the doors opened. We had one thin jacket between us, and Sparrow was wearing it. Her breath came out in small white puffs as she huddled against me, trying to absorb whatever warmth my body could provide. She had finally stopped crying around midnight. Now she slept against my shoulder, her breath warm and steady against my neck, her fingers still wrapped around her poetry book, even in sleep. Her face in repose looked younger than 14. She looked like the little girl she had been before our parents died, before the system got its hooks into us, before life taught her that the world was not kind to children without armor. I watched the people drift through the station. A man in a military uniform checking his phone every 30 seconds, probably waiting for a bus that would take him back to some base, back to a structure and purpose that made sense. A woman with two small children, all three of them wearing the exhausted expressions of people who had been traveling too long, their bags piled around them like a fortress. An elderly couple sharing a sandwich from a vending machine, their hands touching with the casual intimacy of decades together. I wondered what their stories were, whether they had families waiting for them at their destinations, whether they knew how lucky they were to have somewhere to go. I had never felt so alone. My mother used to say that everything happens for a reason, that there is a plan, even when we cannot see it. She believed in God and in goodness and in the fundamental decency of the universe. She had this way of making everything seem all right, even when it wasn't. Even when Dad lost his job and we had to sell the house and move into a smaller apartment. Even when Grandma Rose died and we couldn't afford to fly to Montana for the funeral. Even then, Mom would say that things would work out, that we just had to have faith. She died when a drunk driver ran a red light at 2:47 in the afternoon on a sunny Tuesday in October. So did my father. They were on their way to pick up Sparrow from school. The other driver walked away with a broken collarbone. The universe's plan, apparently, was to leave two children alone in the world with no one to turn to. Our grandfather, Walter Bennett, had tried. I knew that now, even though at the time, all I knew was that he had not come. He had not saved us. He lived in Montana, in a house that felt like a distant dream, and when we needed him most, he had let the state take us away to St. Augustine's. I remember the social worker explaining it to us in that soft, careful voice they all seem to use. Your grandfather has been evaluated, and unfortunately, he doesn't meet the requirements for kinship placement. His age, his health, the distance from your current school district. She had trailed off as if the specifics didn't matter, as if the bottom line wasn't that we were being thrown away. I had waited for him to fight for us, to show up at the group home, to demand custody, to prove that he loved us more than bureaucratic convenience. But days turned to weeks, weeks to months, and he never came. 6 months ago, we received a letter from a lawyer informing us that Walter Bennett had passed away. No funeral invitation, no personal effects, no explanation. Just a form letter and a confirmation that whatever slender thread had connected us to family was now severed forever. I told myself I did not care, that he was just another adult who had failed us, another promise broken, another hope extinguished. I told myself a lot of things to get through those 2.5 years. Around 2 in the morning, Sparrow stirred. Wren? I'm here. What are we going to do? I did not have an answer. I had been turning that question over in my mind for hours, examining it from every angle, and coming up empty every time. $23 would buy us food for a few days, maybe a cheap motel room for one night if we found somewhere desperate enough to rent to a couple of teenagers. But after that, I had no job, no references, no address. In the eyes of the world, I was nothing, less than nothing. I don't know, but we'll figure it out. We always do. Do you remember Grandpa's house? The question caught me off guard. I had spent 2.5 years not thinking about Grandpa's house, not remembering the smell of pine and wood smoke, the creaky porch swing that made a specific rhythm when you rocked it just right, the tire swing hanging from the old oak tree in the front yard. I remember. I used to dream about it. When things got really bad here, I would close my eyes and pretend I was there, sitting on the porch, reading my book, while Grandpa worked in his garden. She paused, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. He grew roses. Do you remember? Grandma's roses. He kept them going, even after she died. I did remember. I remembered the roses, red and pink and white, climbing up trellises that Grandpa had built with his own hands. I remembered Grandma Rose standing among them, her silver hair catching the sunlight, teaching me the names of each variety, like she was introducing me to old friends. Sparrow. I know he's gone. I know the house is gone too, probably. Sold to pay for whatever. But I just wanted you to know. That's where I went, in my head. When I needed to feel safe, I pulled her closer, blinking against the sudden burning in my eyes. We're going to be okay, I whispered, even though I did not believe it. I promise. We're going to be okay. The next morning brought weak coffee from a vending machine and a small miracle in a thick envelope. The letter had been forwarded from St. Augustine's. Sparrow had given our forwarding information to the nice lady at the front desk, the one who always snuck us extra cookies during snack time, and apparently the nice lady had actually done her job. The return address read, Law Offices of Henry Aldridge, Pinewood Hollow, Montana. My hands went cold. Montana, where Grandpa had lived, where he had died. I opened it with fingers that trembled slightly, unsure whether to hope or fear. Dear Miss Wren Bennett, the letter began in formal, old-fashioned script, the kind of handwriting that belonged to a different era. It is my duty to inform you that you have been named as a beneficiary in the estate of Walter James Bennett, deceased. I stopped breathing. Mr. Bennett passed away 6 months ago. Per the terms of his will, you were to be contacted upon your 18th birthday to discuss the disposition of his estate. This estate includes a residential property located at 447 Blackwood Road, Pinewood Hollow, Montana, as well as various personal effects and financial considerations. I am writing to request your presence at my office at your earliest convenience to discuss these matters in person. Please be advised that there are time-sensitive elements to this inheritance that require your immediate attention. The letter continued with contact information and directions, but I had stopped reading. My hands were shaking so badly that the paper rustled like leaves in a wind. Wren? Sparrow was staring at me, her face pale. Wren, what is it? You're scaring me. I handed her the letter. Watched her eyes move across the words. Watched her face transform from fear to confusion to something I had not seen in a very long time. Hope. Grandpa left us his house, she whispered. He didn't forget us. He left us his house. I should have felt happy. I should have felt relieved, grateful, something positive. Instead, I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach, because nothing in my life had ever been that simple, and an inheritance from a grandfather who had supposedly died with nothing, a grandfather the state had dismissed as too poor and too sick to care for us, did not add up. We need to go to Montana, I said slowly. We need to talk to this lawyer and find out what's really going on. Sparrow nodded, clutching the letter to her chest the same way she clutched her book of poems. How much do we have? I counted the money in my pocket. $23 minus the $2 I had spent on coffee. Not enough for 2 bus tickets to Montana. Sparrow was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out a small velvet pouch I had never seen before. What's that? Dakota's emergency stash. She kept it hidden in her mattress. I took it when everyone was distracted during the fight. I stared at my little sister, at the girl I had spent 2.5 years trying to protect from the harsh realities of life in the system. She looked back at me with eyes that were older than her 14 years. Sparrow, that's stealing. She stole my peace. She stole my safety. She stole 2 years of my life, making me afraid to walk down the hallway alone. Sparrow's jaw was set. I consider us even. She poured the contents onto the plastic seat between us. Crumpled bills, a handful of change. I counted it twice. $73. Is that enough? I checked the departure board. A bus to Billings, Montana left in 3 hours. From there, we could find a way to Pinewood Hollow. I did the math in my head. 2 tickets to Billings came to $89. We had 96. It's enough, I said. Barely. We'll have $7 left over. Sparrow smiled, the first real smile I had seen from her in months. There was something fierce in that smile, something that made me realize that my little sister had been changing in ways I hadn't noticed. She was not as soft as I thought. She was not as broken as I feared. I guess Dakota paid for our tickets after all. The bus ride took 14 hours. 14 hours of watching the flat Nebraska farmland give way to the rolling hills of South Dakota, then to the dramatic peaks and valleys of Montana. 14 hours of small towns with names like Winter and Murdo and Miles City, each one a cluster of buildings huddled against the vast emptiness of the plains. Sparrow slept for most of it, her head on my shoulder, her poetry book open on her lap. Even in sleep, she held on to it like a talisman. I did not sleep. I could not. My mind was too full of questions, too crowded with memories I had tried so hard to forget. I remembered visiting Grandpa's house when I was small, before Grandma Rose died, before everything fell apart. The house had seemed magical then, a world away from our cramped apartment in the city. There was land, so much land, stretching out to the mountains in every direction. There were animals, chickens that I was allowed to feed, a horse that Grandpa let me sit on while he led it around the paddock, a dog named Buster who followed me everywhere, his tail wagging like a metronome of pure joy. I remembered Grandma Rose teaching me to bake bread in her old kitchen, the way the dough felt warm and alive beneath my hands. I remembered Grandpa taking me out at night to show me the stars, more stars than I had ever seen, a river of light across the sky that he said was the Milky Way, our own galaxy seen from within. I remembered feeling, for the first time in my young life, that I belonged somewhere. And then we stopped visiting. Dad got a new job and there was never time. Mom talked about going back, made plans that never materialized. Years passed. Grandma Rose died, and the house in Montana became just a memory, a place that existed only in the past tense. Now I was going back, not as a visiting grandchild, but as an orphan, a ward of the state, a homeless teenager with nothing but a letter and a prayer. The bus pulled into Billings at 7 in the morning. The sun was just coming up over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was beautiful, objectively beautiful, but I was too tired and too anxious to appreciate it. We had $7 left. Not enough for another bus ticket, not enough for a taxi. We walked out of the station and into the cold morning air, and I tried not to panic. "Now what?" Sparrow asked. Before I could answer, a voice called out from across the parking lot. "You girls need a ride somewhere?" The man was in his 60s with a weathered face and hands that spoke of decades of manual labor. He was loading bags of feed into the back of an old pickup truck, the kind with rust spots on the fenders, and a bumper sticker that said, "Montana, the last best place." Every instinct I had developed in the system screamed at me to say no. Strangers were dangerous. Offers of help always came with strings attached. Trust was a trap, but we had $7 and 200 miles to go. "Pinewood Hollow," I said. "We're trying to get to Pinewood Hollow." The man's eyes widened slightly. "That's a ways out, past the county line." He looked at us more closely, taking in our rumpled clothes, our single backpack, our exhausted faces. "You girls in some kind of trouble?" "Our grandfather died," Sparrow said, her voice small but steady. "We're going to his house." Something shifted in the man's expression. The wariness softened into something that looked almost like compassion. "Walter Bennett's place?" I felt the world tilt slightly. "You knew him." "Everybody knew Walter. Good man, stubborn as a mule, but good." He finished loading the feed, then gestured toward the truck. "I'm heading that direction anyway. Can get you within a few miles of Blackwood Road." I looked at Sparrow. She looked at me. We were out of options and out of time. "Thank you," I said. "We appreciate it." His name was Frank Morrison, and he talked for most of the 2-hour drive. About his cattle ranch, about his wife who had passed away 5 years ago, about his kids who had moved to cities and rarely called. He talked about Walter Bennett, how he had been a fixture of the community for decades, how people had been surprised when he died because he had seemed so healthy just months before. "Went quick, though," Frank said, "which is a mercy, I suppose. He was alone out there, you know. Tried to get him to move into town, but he wouldn't hear of it. Said that land was his legacy, and he wasn't leaving until they carried him out." I filed that information away, another piece of a puzzle I did not yet understand. Frank dropped us off at a crossroads pointing down a gravel road that wound up into the hills. About 2 miles that way, you can't miss it. Big old house, white with green shutters, or it used to be white anyway. Walter wasn't much for maintenance in his later years. We thanked him again, and he tipped his hat, a gesture so old-fashioned it almost made me smile. "You girls take care now, and if you need anything, ask for Frank Morrison at the feed store. Folks around here look out for each other." We walked. The road was gravel turning to dirt, winding through stands of pine and aspen that whispered in the morning breeze. The air was different here, cleaner, thinner, sharp with the scent of sage and something else I could not identify, something that made me think of childhood summers I could barely remember. Sparrow walked beside me, her hand finding mine occasionally, her eyes drinking in everything around us. "It's beautiful here," she whispered. I forgot how beautiful it was. I had not forgotten. I had just tried very hard not to remember. We came around a bend in the road, and there it was. The house stood in the center of a clearing, surrounded by overgrown gardens and flanked by a weathered barn. It was smaller than I remembered, and considerably worse for wear. The white paint was peeling in great strips, like skin after a sunburn. The porch sagged in the middle, and several windows had been boarded up. A shutter hung from one hinge, banging softly in the breeze, a mournful rhythm that seemed to mark the passage of time. It looked like a house that had given up waiting, but I could see beneath the neglect the bones of what it had been, the solid stone foundation that had stood for a century, the generous windows designed to capture every bit of light, the porch that wrapped around two sides, perfect for sitting and watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. And in the yard, still standing proud despite years of neglect, the old oak tree with the tire swing where Sparrow and I had spent entire summers, pushing each other higher and higher, laughing until our sides hurt. Sparrow made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "The swing," she breathed. "It's still there." I could not speak. My throat was too tight. We approached the front door, stepping carefully on porch boards that groaned under our weight. The lock was modern, a deadbolt that did not match the brass key in my hand. But I remembered something my grandfather had taught me years ago. I reached up, running my fingers along the top of the door frame until they found a small hollow. Inside was a rusty house key covered in cobwebs and dust. My grandfather had always said that locks were for honest people. The door opened with a creak that echoed through the empty house like a greeting, or perhaps a warning. The smell hit me first, dust and decay and something else, something that made my eyes sting with sudden tears. Lavender. My grandmother had kept lavender sachets in every drawer, every closet, every corner of the house. She had been dead for 10 years, but her scent remained, a ghost of a ghost. We stepped inside, our footsteps loud in the silence. The furniture was draped in white sheets, ghostly shapes in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. Dust motes danced in the air, disturbed by our movement for the first time in months. I moved through the living room, trailing my fingers along the shrouded furniture. The mantelpiece still held the same clock, stopped now at 3:47. The bookshelf still sagged under the weight of my grandmother's romance novels. A photograph hung crooked on the wall, and when I wiped the dust from the glass, I saw my parents' faces looking back at me. Young, happy, alive. I looked away quickly. The kitchen was at the back of the house, and it was there that I found what I was looking for. A door. Simple, wooden, painted the same pale yellow as the walls. It had no doorknob, just a small, dark keyhole. The pantry, but before I could investigate further, there was a sharp knock at the front door. I froze. Sparrow's hand found mine, her grip tight with fear. "Who could that be?" she whispered. "I don't know. Stay here." I went to the door and opened it a crack. A man stood on the porch, elderly with white hair like dandelion fluff and hands spotted with age. He was dressed in a tweed jacket that had seen better decades, and he carried a leather briefcase that looked nearly as old as he was. "Miss Bennett?" His voice was careful, measured, the voice of someone who chose his words deliberately. "I'm Henry Aldridge. I believe you received my letter." The offices of Henry Aldridge were on the second floor of what had once been a Victorian mansion on Pinewood Hollow's Main Street. The building smelled of old paper and leather and something else, something that made me think of my grandfather's workshop. I realized with a start that it was sawdust. There were woodworking tools arranged on a shelf behind his desk, and half-finished carvings scattered among the legal documents. "Please sit down." He gestured to leather chairs that had seen better decades. "We have much to discuss, and I'm afraid not all of it is pleasant." Sparrow and I sat. The chairs sighed under us, releasing a faint cloud of dust. "I'm glad you came," Aldrich said, settling into his own chair behind a desk covered in towers of files. I was worried you might not. The system is not kind to children, and you have every reason to distrust adults bearing unexpected news. You knew our grandfather, I said. It was not a question. For 40 years, we played chess every Thursday evening. He beat me more often than not. A faint smile crossed his face, then faded. He was a good man, your grandfather, one of the best I ever knew, and he loved you girls more than anything in this world. I felt Sparrow stiffen beside me. Then why didn't he come for us? Aldridge was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with something that sounded like guilt. He tried. Lord knows he tried. I helped him file the paperwork myself. Applications for emergency custody, appeals of the kinship placement denial, letters to every official we could think of. He shook his head. The system was designed to keep children in the system. Every door we knocked on closed in our face. They said he was too old, too sick, too far from your school. They had a dozen reasons, all of them paperwork, none of them human. So he just gave up? The bitterness in my voice surprised me. Never. Aldridge looked at me with eyes that were suddenly fierce. He never gave up. He fought for 2.5 years until the day he died. And when he realized he couldn't win that battle, he found another way. He reached into his desk and pulled out a small object that gleamed in the afternoon light. A key, old-fashioned, made of brass, with an ornate head and a long shaft. He left you this. I stared at the key. It seemed too small, too ordinary to carry the weight of meaning that Aldridge's voice implied. Your grandfather left you everything he had, the lawyer continued. The house, the land, approximately 40 acres, and his personal effects. However, there are complications. What kind of complications? Financial ones. At the time of his death, your grandfather owed approximately $45,000 between the mortgage on the property and several years of back taxes. My heart sank. Of course there was a catch. So we inherit the debt, I said flatly, along with a house that's probably worth less than what's owed on it? That is one way to look at it. Aldridge steepled his fingers, watching us over the tops of his spectacles. The other way is to consider the offer that is already on the table. What offer? A company called Ridgemont Holdings has expressed interest in purchasing the property. They are offering to assume all outstanding debts, plus provide you with a cash payment of $8,000. You would walk away free and clear, with money in your pocket. $8,000. It was more money than I had ever had in my life. It was enough to get an apartment, to enroll Sparrow in school, to start over somewhere that was not a bus station. That sounds too good to be true, I said slowly. It often does when it is. Aldridge placed the brass key on the desk between us. Your grandfather left very specific instructions. He said I was to give you this key on your 18th birthday and tell you that you had a choice. What kind of choice? You can accept Ridgemont's offer. I will handle the paperwork. You will sign where I tell you, and you will leave here with $8,000 and no further obligations. It is the practical choice, the safe choice. He paused, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Anticipation, perhaps, or hope. Or you can take this key and go to the house. Your grandfather said that if you chose the key, everything you needed to understand would be waiting for you there. He pushed the key closer to me. The choice is yours. I looked at the key. It was just a piece of metal, tarnished and old, probably for a door that did not even lock properly anymore. But it was also the last thing my grandfather had wanted to give me. His final message, whatever it might be. The practical choice loomed before me. The safe choice. The $8,000 that could change our lives. And then my mind drifted to my mother, who had believed that everything happens for a reason. To my father, who had taught me that the easy path is rarely the right one. To my grandfather, who had apparently spent years fighting a system that did not want him to keep us, who had never stopped trying, who had held on to this key for us until the very end. I picked up the key. Where's the pantry? If you have ever stood at a crossroads not knowing which path to take, you understand what I was feeling. A mysterious key, an inheritance full of debt, a company offering easy money, and somewhere in that old house, a pantry that my grandfather thought was more important than anything else. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between the safe path and the unknown one? Have you ever trusted someone's instructions even when they didn't make sense? Tell me in the comments. And if you want to know what I found behind that door, what secret my grandfather had been protecting all those years, subscribe and keep listening. Because what comes next changed everything. We returned to the house as the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the overgrown yard. The oak tree with the tire swing stood sentinel, its branches reaching toward a sky that was beginning to turn purple at the edges. I stood in front of the pantry door, the brass key in my hand. Sparrow was behind me, her breath quick with anticipation. "What do you think is in there?" "I don't know. Canned goods and cobwebs, probably." But I did not believe that. I could feel something in the air, a weight of significance that seemed to emanate from the simple wooden door. I slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for exactly this moment. The mechanism was stiff, resistant, but with a hard twist, it gave way with a satisfying clunk that echoed through the empty house. The door swung open, and my world changed forever. The room beyond was small, no bigger than a closet, but it was not filled with canned goods or bags of flour. It was filled with boxes, cardboard banker's boxes, stacked from floor to ceiling, each one labeled with a number in my grandfather's familiar handwriting. Number 1, number 2, all the way up to number 12. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I pulled the chain on the single bare bulb, flooding the space with weak yellow light. I knelt in front of box number 1 and used my house key to slit the packing tape. Inside was cash, bundles of it, 20s and 50s wrapped in rubber bands, packed tight like bricks. There had to be thousands of dollars here, tens of thousands. And on top of the money, a cream-colored envelope with my name written on it in my grandfather's shaky hand. I opened it with trembling fingers. "My dearest Wren," it began, "if you are reading this, then several things have happened. I am gone. You have survived without me, and you have come home. For all of those things, I am both sorry and proud. I know what they told you. They told you I left you with nothing. In a way, they were right. I left you no easy inheritance, no simple check to cash. I left you a choice. I see you have made the first part of that choice correctly. You chose the key. You chose to trust me. The world is a complicated place, Wren. There are forces, big and loud and greedy, that want to swallow everything up. I have spent the last 10 years fighting one of those forces. They wanted this land, our land. They tried to bully me, scare me, price me out. They did not succeed. I knew I would not live forever. I knew that one day I would have to leave you, and the thought broke my heart. But I also knew that if I left you a simple fortune, it would be a curse, not a blessing. Money without purpose is poison. So I made a plan, a long, difficult plan. This pantry is the heart of it. For 15 years, I have saved every spare dollar from my pension, every penny from selling vegetables at the market, every dime I saved by living simply. I did not put it in a bank. Banks leave traces. Banks can be frozen, seized. In this box, you will find $60,000. It is enough to pay off the mortgage and the back taxes completely. It is enough to make this house and this land yours, free and clear, forever. This is your first choice, Wren. Take this money, pay off the debts, keep the home, or take this money and disappear. Buy yourself a new life. No one would blame you. But if you choose to stay, know that this is only the beginning. This pantry holds more than just money. It holds the whole story. Do not be too quick. Open box number 2 before you decide anything. Whatever you choose, know that I love you and your sister more than my own life. I tried to come for you. I tried so hard. The system would not let me. But I never stopped fighting. I never stopped loving you. And I never, ever gave up. Your grandfather, Walter. I finished reading and looked up to find Sparrow standing in the doorway, her eyes wide as moons. "How much money is that?" she whispered. I counted it twice just to be sure. Bundle after bundle, each one containing $500 stacked in neat rows that filled the entire box. $60,000. The number hung in the air between us, impossible and real. But they said he was poor. They said he couldn't afford to take care of us. They were wrong. My voice came out rough, scraping past the lump in my throat. Or they lied. I looked at the other boxes, stacked floor to ceiling. 11 more mysteries waiting to be opened. And somewhere outside, through the grimy kitchen window, I noticed a black SUV parked on the road. It had not been there when we arrived. We need to understand what we're dealing with before we do anything else. Sparrow nodded, her face pale but determined. What do we do now? I looked at the box labeled number 2. We keep reading, but before I could reach for it, a sound made us both freeze. A scratching at the back door, a soft, plaintive whine. Sparrow moved before I could stop her, crossing to the door and pulling it open. On the back porch stood a dog, medium-sized with a coat the color of old pennies, matted and dirty. It was painfully thin, ribs visible beneath its patchy fur, and one ear was torn, half-healed from some old injury. But its eyes, soft brown and infinitely gentle, looked up at Sparrow with something like recognition. "Oh," Sparrow breathed, dropping to her knees. "Oh, you poor thing. Where did you come from?" The dog's tail wagged once tentatively, and then it limped forward and pressed its head against Sparrow's chest. "We should be careful," I started to say. "It might be sick or—" But Sparrow was not listening. She was wrapping her arms around the dirty, skinny dog, and tears were streaming down her face. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's okay. You're safe now. We've got you." The dog's tail wagged again, stronger this time. "What should we call him?" Sparrow asked, looking up at me. I looked at the copper-colored coat, at the gentle eyes, at the way the dog seemed to know exactly where it belonged. "Copper," I said. "His coat looks like copper." Sparrow smiled through her tears. "Copper, I like that." That night we slept in our grandfather's house for the first time in 3 years. The electricity was off, but we found candles in the kitchen and blankets in the linen closet that only smelled slightly of mothballs. We made a nest on the living room floor, the 3 of us. Sparrow and me and Copper, who seemed determined never to let us out of his sight. I should have slept. I was exhausted, bone-tired, running on nothing but coffee and adrenaline for days. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those boxes. That money, my grandfather's letter. This pantry holds more than just money. It holds the whole story. What story? What else could there be? Around midnight, I gave up on sleep. I lit a candle and made my way back to the pantry. Box number 2 was heavier than the first. I carried it to the kitchen table and opened it carefully. No money this time. Instead, it was full of documents, folders and folders of them, plus a thick, leather-bound journal that fell open to pages covered in my grandfather's careful handwriting. And another letter. "My brave girl," it began. "You stayed. I knew you would. Now the real work begins. The company that wants this land is called Ridgemont Holdings. They are a subsidiary of a larger corporation, and they present themselves as legitimate developers. But their methods are anything but. They prey on the elderly, the indebted, the vulnerable. They find small landowners like me, people with deep roots but shallow pockets, and they begin a campaign of attrition. They offer a lowball price. When it is refused, the problems start. Property lines are suddenly disputed. Anonymous complaints are filed with the county about code violations that don't exist. Taxes are mysteriously reassessed at a higher rate. It is a slow, methodical strangulation. They want you to feel so overwhelmed, so hopeless, that when they come back with their original lowball offer, it feels like a rescue. I did not break, but I knew they were counting on me not being here forever. They are patient. They are waiting for this land to fall into hands that do not know its value. They are waiting for someone who will take the quick, easy money. They are not expecting you. In this box, you will find everything. Every threatening letter they sent me. Every photograph of the surveyors who trespassed on my land at night. Every complaint I filed with the sheriff that was subsequently lost or ignored. I also kept a journal. It details every phone call, every visit, every veiled threat. It is a complete record of their harassment. It is my testimony. But there is more. Look deeper, Wren. The answers you need are not all in this house. Check my journal. Page 47. She always loved the rain. Your grandfather, Walter. Turn to page 47 of the journal. The entry was dated 3 years earlier. A description of an August thunderstorm. The storm came from the west, moving fast. Rose always loved watching them come in. We would sit on the porch together, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder. I miss her. I miss the girls. The house is so quiet now. At the bottom of the page in smaller handwriting that seemed almost like code. The storm passes, but the well remembers. She always loved the rain. Check the lining. I read it 3 times trying to make sense of it. She always loved the rain. But who was she? And what well? There was an old well at the back of the property, covered with wooden planks, but I did not see how that connected. And then it hit me. She was capitalized. It was not a person, it was a name. I went to the bookshelf in the living room, running my fingers along the spines until I found it. A slim volume of poetry by Genevieve Rain, the same author as Sparrow's book. I opened it carefully, running my fingers along the inside of the front cover. The lining paper was old, yellowed with age, but in one corner it seemed slightly raised. I peeled it back with trembling fingers. Behind the paper was a small silver key and a slip of paper with a number, 4471. The name of a bank, First National Claremont. I stared at it for a long moment, my heart racing. My grandfather had left a trail, clues hidden in books, secrets locked in boxes. He had known somehow that this day would come, that I would be standing here alone in his kitchen, trying to piece together a puzzle he had spent years creating. I put everything back where I had found it and went to check on my sleeping sister. Tomorrow we would have more questions to answer. Tonight I needed to think. The next morning I was coaxing my grandfather's ancient percolator back to life when Copper started barking. Someone was knocking on the front door. He was a man in his mid-40s with expensive shoes and an expensive suit, and the kind of smile that did not quite reach his eyes. His hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place, and his handshake was firm, almost aggressive. Every instinct I had developed in the foster system screamed that he was dangerous. "Miss Bennett? Marcus Vance, Ridgemont Holdings." He handed me a business card that felt thick and costly in my fingers. "I wanted to be the first to congratulate you on your inheritance." "How did you know I was here?" "Small town. Word travels fast." His smile widened slightly, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect. "I assume Mr. Aldridge has explained our offer?" $8,000 to assume the debt. Yes. That was the original offer. He glanced past me into the house, his eyes cataloging everything. "But we're prepared to be more generous. 15,000. Cash. You could be on a bus back to wherever you came from by tonight." Back to wherever you came from. Not forward. Back. "I haven't made a decision yet." Of course. These things take time." He pressed another card into my hand. "But don't take too long. Property taxes wait for no one. And this old place," he looked up at the peeling paint, the sagging porch. "It's a money pit. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Don't waste it on a pile of rotting wood in the middle of nowhere." "I'll keep that in mind." "Please do." He turned to go, then paused at the edge of the porch. "One more thing. Your grandfather was a stubborn man. He made things complicated, for himself and for everyone else. I'd hate to see you make the same mistakes." There was something in his voice that made Copper growl low in his throat. "Is that a threat?" "A friendly warning." His smile was back, as smooth and cold as a snake. "This is a small town, Miss Bennett. We take care of our own, but outsiders sometimes find that things don't go their way." He walked to his black SUV, the same one I had seen parked on the road the day before, and drove away without looking back. I went back inside, my hands shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. Sparrow was sitting at the kitchen table with box number 2 open in front of her, my grandfather's journal in her hands. "I read some of it," she said quietly, "while you were talking to that man. And Grandpa wasn't paranoid. They really did try to destroy him." She turned the journal so I could see. Page after page of documentation. Phone calls at 3 a.m., the timestamp noted beside each one. Anonymous tips to the county inspector about non-existent code violations. His rose garden poisoned with commercial-grade herbicide. The dead bushes photographed and labeled. A surveyor caught on camera crossing onto his land at night. The footage dated and filed. It was a chronicle of harassment spanning 10 years. 10 years of systematic pressure, designed to break an old man's spirit. "They wanted him to sell," Sparrow said. "They wanted him to give up. But he didn't. No. I looked at the evidence of my grandfather's decade-long war. He didn't. Ren, we can't sell to them. We can't let them win. I looked at the $60,000 in the other room, at the key to the bank vault in my pocket, at Marcus Vance's business card in my hand. Let's find out what else Grandpa left us first. We walked into town that afternoon. I needed to understand what we were dealing with, and that meant talking to the people who had known my grandfather. The town of Pinewood Hollow was the kind of place that seemed to exist outside of time. Main Street was lined with brick buildings that had been standing for a century, their facades weathered but dignified. A diner called Rosie's occupied one corner, its neon sign flickering uncertainly. Next to it was a feed store with bags of grain stacked in the windows, and beyond that, a hardware store that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. The feed store was our first stop. The smell hit me as soon as I opened the door. Hay and leather and something earthy that reminded me of summers long past. Bags of grain were stacked in rows, and tools hung from pegboards on every wall. Behind the worn wooden counter stood a woman with silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes. "Help you girls with something? I'm Wren Bennett, Walter's granddaughter." Her face transformed. The polite wariness of a shopkeeper greeting strangers melted into something warm and genuine. "Oh, honey, we've been wondering when you'd show up." She came around the counter and, to my surprise, pulled me into a hug. "I'm Opal Fitch. Your grandpa and I were friends for 40 years. She smelled like hay and lavender, and for a moment, I forgot to be defensive. "I'm so sorry about Walter," she said, pulling back to look at us both. "He was a good man, one of the best I ever knew. And he loved you girls so much. Talked about you all the time." "He did. Of course he did. Showed me every picture, every drawing you ever sent him. Kept them all on his refrigerator like they were museum pieces." She shook her head. "He fought so hard to get you back. The system just wouldn't let him." I felt something shift in my chest, a weight I had been carrying for years suddenly lifting. "Opal, what can you tell me about Ridgemont Holdings?" Her face darkened. "Those vultures. They've been circling this town for years, buying up every piece of land they can get their hands on. Half the ranches around here belong to them now." She lowered her voice. "Your grandpa was the last holdout, the only one who wouldn't sell. Do you know why they want the land so badly?" "Nobody knows for sure. They say they're planning some kind of development, golf course, resort, something like that. But Walter never believed it. He said there was something else going on, something bigger." I nodded slowly, filing this information away. "Opal, do you know a man named Gideon Thorne?" Her expression shifted, becoming cautious. "Gideon lives out on the old Miller Road. He used to own 30 acres next to your grandpa's land, until Ridgemont got to him." "What happened?" "They tricked him, got him to sign papers he didn't understand. By the time he realized what he'd done, it was too late." She shook her head. "He's never forgiven himself, barely leaves his house anymore." "Do you think he'd talk to me?" "You can try, but be gentle with him. Losing that land broke something in him." Gideon Thorne's cabin was at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by overgrown fields that had once been farmland. The man who answered the door was in his 70s, with the weathered face of someone who had spent his life outdoors and the haunted eyes of someone who had lost everything. "Mr. Thorne, I'm Wren Bennett, Walter's granddaughter." The name seemed to reach something in him. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and he stepped back to let us in. "Walter," he said softly, "he was a good neighbor, a good friend. I'm trying to understand what happened here, with Ridgemont." Gideon sat down heavily in an old armchair. The cabin was small but clean, and I noticed photographs on every surface. Pictures of a farm, of cattle, of a younger Gideon standing proud in front of a house that no longer belonged to him. "They came 5 years ago, smooth talkers in fancy suits, said they wanted to buy my land for development, offered me a fair price, or what seemed fair at the time." He shook his head. "I was behind on my taxes, medical bills from my wife's illness. I didn't read the fine print." "What was in the fine print?" "A clause that let them void the agreement if I didn't vacate within 30 days, and another one that transferred all mineral rights, water rights, everything, to them permanently." His hands clenched on the arms of his chair. By the time I understood what I'd signed, it was too late. They owned everything. I couldn't even graze a single cow on land my family had worked for 3 generations. Do you still have the contract? I have a copy. I've been meaning to take it to a lawyer. But what's the point? They have lawyers too. Better ones, expensive ones. Can I see it? He looked at me for a long moment, something like hope flickering in his eyes. You're Walter's granddaughter. Yes. He never gave up. Even when everyone else did. He never stopped fighting them. I know. Gideon rose and went to a small desk in the corner. He rummaged through papers for a moment, then returned with a thick folder. This is everything. The contract, the letters they sent, the threats. He handed it to me. Walter said someone would come eventually, someone who could use this. Did he know what they were really after? Gideon's eyes met mine. He knew. He just never told anyone. That night back at the house, Sparrow and I spread out everything we had. The journal, the photographs, the letters, Gideon's contract with its hidden clauses. There's a pattern, I said, tracing the timeline with my finger. They started targeting properties on the east side of town about 12 years ago. Every time someone refused to sell, they'd start having problems. Mysterious tax reassessments, anonymous complaints, legal challenges. And they always ended up selling eventually. Almost always. The only one who didn't was Grandpa. Sparrow was quiet for a moment, looking at the map I had drawn, marking each property that Ridgemont had acquired. Wren, look at this. She pointed to the pattern of acquisitions. All of them formed a rough circle around a central point, our grandfather's land. They're surrounding us, I said slowly. All these purchases, all these years. It's all been leading here. But why? What's so special about our land? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver key I had found in the book of poetry. I think it's time we found out. The next morning, we called Mr. Aldridge and asked him to drive us to Claremont. First National Bank was a modern glass and steel building that felt out of place in the small Montana town. Inside, the air was cold and sterile, all polished surfaces and hushed voices. The vault was in the basement. A bank official led us through a heavy steel door and into a room lined with safety deposit boxes. He used his key, I used mine, and a long metal box slid out of the wall. We took it to a private viewing room. Aldridge closed the door behind us. Inside the box was a single tube of rolled paper tied with a faded red ribbon, and one more letter. I untied the ribbon and carefully unrolled the paper. It was a map, hand-drawn, covered in my grandfather's precise technical notations. It showed our property in detail, every hill and valley, every stream and tree line. And in the center, circled in red, a single word: lithium, followed by a string of numbers and chemical formulas. I looked up at Aldridge, who was staring at the map with wide eyes. Lithium, he breathed. Of course. What does it mean? It means your grandfather found what everyone's been looking for, a significant lithium deposit right here on your land. He ran a hand through his white hair. Lithium is essential for batteries, phones, laptops, electric cars. The demand is astronomical. A deposit like this, in a politically stable country with good infrastructure, he shook his head. It could be worth millions, tens of millions. I looked at the map, at the red circle that marked treasure beyond anything I had imagined. That's why they wanted the land. Not for a golf course, for mining. They must have suspected. Maybe they found hints in old geological surveys, but they didn't have proof. Your grandfather did. I turned to the letter. My dearest girls, it began. Now you know the real secret. Your grandfather was a geologist. He found this deposit 20 years ago, before the world knew how valuable lithium would become. We talked about what to do with it, and we made a choice. We chose to keep it secret. If the world knew what was buried here, this land would be destroyed. They would tear open the earth, poison the water, drive away every living thing. The mountains we love would become an open pit mine, a scar on the face of the earth that would never heal. We could not let that happen, so we hid the truth. We lived simply, asking for nothing, taking nothing, and we waited. They found out somehow, maybe a careless word, maybe an old colleague with loose lips. They started coming around, making offers, then threats. They thought they could break us. They were wrong. Now the decision falls to you. You have two choices. You can take this map to the highest bidder, sell the mineral rights for a fortune. You would be wealthy beyond your wildest dreams, or you can do what we could not. You can use this map as a weapon and a shield. You can go public, bring in scientists and journalists, make this land so visible that no corporation would dare touch it. You could establish a conservation easement, protect this place forever. One path leads to wealth, the other leads to purpose. A cage of gold is still a cage. A life of purpose, even a simple one, is true freedom. The choice is yours. I love you both more than words can say. Whatever you decide, know that you have made us proud. Your grandmother Rose. I finished reading and looked up. Sparrow was crying silently, tears running down her cheeks. Aldridge was staring at the map like it might bite him. "What do we do?" Sparrow whispered. I looked at the map, at the red circle that represented millions of dollars, at the choice my grandparents had made, the sacrifice they had accepted, the secret they had kept for 20 years. The drive back from Claremont started in silence, but halfway home Sparrow spoke. "We're not selling, right?" I did not answer immediately. My hands gripped the edge of the seat. "Wren? I don't know." The words came out harder than I intended. "Sparrow, we're talking about millions of dollars. Millions. We could go to college. We could buy a house somewhere safe. We could never worry about money again." "But Grandpa is dead." My voice cracked. "He spent his whole life fighting, and what did it get him? He died alone in a hospital he couldn't afford. He never got to see us. He never got to hold us again." Sparrow's face went pale. "You want to sell? I want us to be safe. I want you to have a future. I've spent the last 3 years trying to keep you alive, Sparrow. Do you have any idea what that's like? Always worrying? Always afraid? So you'd betray everything he fought for? Everything Grandma believed in? It's not betrayal to want a better life. It is if you get it by destroying what they loved." We were both crying now. Aldridge kept his eyes on the road, wisely saying nothing. "He wrote us letters for 2.5 years, Sparrow said, her voice breaking. "Every single week. He never gave up on us. And you want to give up on him?" "I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic. You're being scared." The words hit me like a slap. Sparrow turned away, pressing her forehead against the window. "If you sell," she said quietly, "you do it alone. I won't sign anything. I won't agree. And I'll never forgive you." The rest of the drive passed in terrible silence. When we got home, Sparrow went straight to the oak tree with Copper. She sat on the tire swing, not swinging, just sitting, her arms wrapped around herself. I watched her from the porch, feeling like the worst person in the world. "I need to pause here and talk to you directly. Have you ever been torn between protecting someone you love and honoring someone you've lost? Have you ever stood at a crossroads where both paths felt impossible?" Sparrow was right. I was scared, terrified actually. We had nothing, and suddenly we had everything, and I didn't know how to hold on to it without losing what mattered most. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose between safety and loyalty? Between the practical choice and the right one? And stay with me, because what happened that night changed everything between us. That night, after Sparrow had finally come inside and gone to bed without speaking to me, I could not sleep. I found myself in the pantry again, surrounded by boxes I had not yet opened. My grandfather's secrets, waiting to be discovered. Something drew me to box number 3. Maybe I needed strength for what was coming. Maybe I needed to remember why we were fighting. Inside was a shoebox, old, battered, held together with a rubber band. I opened it. Letters, hundreds of them. All addressed to St. Augustine's Group Home for Children, Lincoln, Nebraska. All of them stamped return to sender. Addressee unknown, refused. My grandfather's handwriting, week after week, month after month, year after year. I picked up the first one, dated 2.5 years ago. "My dear Wren, my dear Sparrow, I am writing to tell you that I have not forgotten you. I will never forget you. The system says I cannot have you. They say I am too old, too poor, too far away. They have forms and regulations that say a grandfather cannot love his grandchildren enough to care for them. They are wrong. I am fighting. Every day I am fighting. I will not stop until you are home with me. In the meantime, know this. You are loved. You are wanted. You are not alone. I will find a way. Your grandfather, Walter. There were dozens more, one every week for 2.5 years. Some were long, filling pages with descriptions of his daily life. The garden, where he grew tomatoes and peppers and roses that made him think of grandma. The weather, the seasons changing, the first snow of winter and the first wildflowers of spring. The neighbors who asked about us, who remembered us from our visits as children. Some were short, just a few lines assuring us that he had not given up, that he was still fighting, that he loved us. The last one was dated 3 weeks before he died. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible. My darlings, it said, I am sorry, my body is failing me, but I have not given up on you. I never will. Come home. Find the key. Find the truth. And know that you were never, ever abandoned. I love you. I love you. I love you. I was sobbing before I finished. Great, wrenching sobs that I had been holding back for years. 3 years of anger. 3 years of thinking he had forgotten us, abandoned us, left us to the mercy of the system, and he had been fighting every single day. Sparrow found me. She must have heard me crying. She stood in the doorway for a moment, then crossed the room and wrapped her arms around me. He tried, I gasped. He tried so hard. I know, she whispered, I know. I was so angry at him. For years and the whole time, he was writing to us, every single week, and we never knew. We never got a single letter. The system kept them from us. Why? Why would they do that? Sparrow held me tighter. Because they could. Because we were just files to them. Because nobody fights for kids like us. We stayed there until dawn, 2 sisters surrounded by proof of love, finally understanding what we had almost lost. When the sun came up, I looked at Sparrow with red-rimmed eyes. I'm sorry, I said. For what I said in the car. For even thinking about selling. I know you were scared. I was scared too. She looked up at me. But we're not alone anymore. We have each other. Always. So what do we do now? I looked at the letters scattered around us, at the boxes still waiting to be opened, at the evidence of my grandfather's 10-year war. We fight. The week that followed was the busiest of my life. Mr. Aldridge was a man transformed. The sleepy country lawyer became a general marshaling his troops, making phone calls, sending letters, calling in favors accumulated over 40 years of practice. He contacted a professor at Montana State University, a geologist who specialized in mineral deposits. He reached out to an environmental lawyer in Missoula who had made a career out of fighting corporate interests. He spoke to a journalist at the Billings Gazette who had been trying to write about Ridgemont Holdings for years but could never get anyone to go on the record, and he prepared us for battle. They're going to come after you, he warned us one afternoon in his office. Ridgemont doesn't give up easily. They'll try to intimidate you, to confuse you, to wear you down. They might offer you more money. They might threaten legal action. They might do things that skirt the edge of the law. What can we do? Document everything. Don't meet with anyone alone. Don't sign anything without showing it to me first. He handed me a small digital recorder. And if Marcus Vance or anyone else from Ridgemont contacts you, turn this on. The first blow came 3 days later. We received a letter from a law firm in Denver representing Ridgemont Holdings. It informed us that they were challenging the validity of our grandfather's will on the grounds of mental incapacity and undue influence. They demanded that all assets be frozen pending an investigation. Can they do that? I asked Aldridge. They can try. The case has no merit. Your grandfather was of sound mind and the will was properly executed. But they can tie us up in court for months, maybe years if we let them. What do? We don't let them. He smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from him. I've been waiting for this fight for a long time. The night before our press conference, I could not sleep. I was sitting at the kitchen table, going over our evidence for the 100th time, when Copper's head snapped up. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Headlights swept across the windows. I knew who it was before I heard the knock. Marcus Vance stood on our porch, his face half lit by the moon. No smile this time. No pretense of friendliness. Just cold, calculated menace. Miss Bennett, I thought we should have one last conversation. There's nothing to talk about. $75,000. Final offer. Sign the papers tonight, and this all goes away. You can leave tomorrow, start fresh somewhere else. Forget any of this ever happened. And if I don't, he stepped closer. I could smell his cologne, expensive and suffocating. Then I will make your life very, very difficult. I have lawyers who bill more per hour than you'll make in a month. I can tie you up in court for years. I can make sure no bank will give you a loan, no employer will hire you, no landlord will rent to you. His voice dropped. I can make you wish you'd never come back to this town. A floorboard creaked behind me. Sparrow stepped out of the shadows, her chin lifted, her eyes blazing. Our grandfather fought you for 10 years, she said. Her voice did not waver. 10 years, alone, sick, old, and he never gave up. Vance's eyes flicked to her, dismissive. Your grandfather was a stubborn fool who died with nothing. He died with his integrity. He died knowing he hadn't sold his soul to people like you. Sparrow moved to stand beside me, her shoulder touching mine. We're his granddaughters. We're not going anywhere. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Vance laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said, but we'll regret it together. Copper growled again, louder this time, and took a step toward Vance. The man retreated, his expensive shoes clicking on the porch steps. See you in court, Miss Bennett. His SUV disappeared into the darkness. Sparrow let out a shaky breath. I realized my hands were trembling. Did we just do that? She whispered. I put my arm around her. Yeah, we did. She leaned into me, and I felt the wall that had been between us since Claremont finally crumbled. I'm sorry, I said again, for being scared, for almost giving up. We're sisters, she said simply. We fight together. We stood there until the cold drove us inside, two sisters against the world, finally on the same side. The press conference was held in the Pinewood Hollow Community Center, a building that usually hosted bingo nights and church potlucks. That morning it was packed with reporters, scientists, and what seemed like half the town. I stood at a podium that felt too big for me, looking out at a sea of faces. Sparrow stood beside me, her hand in mine. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. My name is Wren Bennett. This is my sister Sparrow, and this is our home. I told them everything. The 10 years of harassment, the threatening letters, the mysterious reassessments and anonymous complaints. I showed them my grandfather's journal, his photographs, his meticulous documentation, and then I showed them the map. This is what Ridgemont Holdings has been after, I said. A significant lithium deposit buried beneath our land, worth millions. The room erupted in murmurs. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. I held up my hand for silence. My grandfather discovered this deposit 20 years ago. He kept it secret because he knew what would happen if it became public. They would tear this land apart. They would poison the water, destroy the forests, scar these mountains forever. He gave up wealth beyond imagining to protect this place. He died protecting it. I looked at Aldridge, who nodded encouragingly. Today, I'm announcing that we will be working with the Montana Conservation Trust to establish a permanent conservation easement on our land. The mineral rights will be donated to the state, with the condition that they can never be extracted. This land will be protected forever. More murmurs, more cameras. But that's not all, I continued. We're also filing a formal complaint with the State Attorney General regarding Ridgemont Holdings' pattern of harassment and predatory business practices. We have evidence that spans 10 years, and we're asking anyone else who has been victimized by this company to come forward. From the back of the room, an elderly man rose to his feet, Gideon Thorne, his weathered face set with determination. I'll testify, he said. They cheated me out of my land. I have proof. Another voice spoke up. Me too. They threatened my family when we wouldn't sell. And another. And another. By the end of the morning, 7 people had come forward with stories of Ridgemont's tactics. 7 families who had suffered in silence, thinking they were alone. realizing for the first time that they were not. Sheriff Colton Briggs, who had been standing at the back of the room with his arms crossed, finally spoke. I've heard enough. I'm opening an official investigation into Ridgemont Holdings. He paused and something like shame crossed his face. And I want to apologize. Your grandfather came to me for help years ago. I didn't listen. I thought he was just a stubborn old man making trouble. I was wrong. I nodded, accepting the apology without speaking. Some wounds take time to heal. As the crowd dispersed, a reporter approached me. Miss Bennett, one more question. The lithium deposit you're sitting on is worth a fortune. You could sell it and never work another day in your life. Why are you giving it away? I thought about my grandfather spending his final years in poverty so that this land could remain whole. About my grandmother choosing purpose over wealth. About the hundreds of letters that never arrived, written by a man who never stopped loving us. Because some things are worth more than money, I said. Because my grandparents taught me that a life of purpose is true freedom. And because this land was their gift to us, and we won't let anyone destroy it. The aftermath unfolded faster than I could have imagined. Ridgemont Holdings withdrew their legal challenge within a week. Marcus Vance was fired a few days later, replaced by a crisis management team that issued carefully worded apologies and quietly began selling off the properties they had acquired in Pinewood Hollow. The state attorney general launched an investigation that would eventually result in a landmark settlement, with Ridgemont paying restitution to every family they had defrauded. Gideon Thorne got his land back. So did 3 other families. Our grandfather's land became the Walter and Rose Bennett Conservation Area, protected in perpetuity. The university sent geologists to study the lithium deposit, not to extract it, but to understand it. They published papers about responsible resource management and the importance of community resistance to corporate exploitation. And we, Sparrow and me and Copper, we made a home. The money from box number 1 paid off the debts and left us with enough to live simply for a while. The house needed work, so much work, and we learned to do most of it ourselves. We replaced the broken windows. We fixed the sagging porch. We painted the peeling walls, choosing the same white with green shutters that the house had worn for a century. Sparrow enrolled in the local high school. On her first day, she was terrified, convinced that she would be an outcast, the weird orphan girl from the group home. But she came home that afternoon with a smile on her face and news of 3 new friends. I got a job at Opal's feed store, learning the business from the ground up. Opal was patient with my mistakes and generous with her praise, and slowly I began to feel like I belonged somewhere. The remaining boxes revealed their treasures slowly over the months that followed. Box 4 contained photographs, hundreds of them, spanning decades. My grandmother as a young woman, beautiful and laughing. My grandfather in a hard hat, holding geological samples. My mother as a child, gap-toothed and grinning. Box 5 held my grandmother's recipe cards, each one written in her careful script. Apple pie, buttermilk biscuits, the casserole that Opal said was famous throughout the county. We made every recipe, one by one, filling the house with smells that felt like memory. Box 6 contained my grandfather's geological journals from his years of fieldwork, covering 3 continents in 5 decades. Reading them, I understood for the first time who he had been before he was our grandfather. A scientist, an adventurer, a man who had seen the world and chosen this small piece of it as the place he wanted to spend his life. Box 7 held our mother's childhood drawings, and looking at them, I could see echoes of Sparrow in every line. The same imagination, the same eye for beauty, the same stubborn hope. And in Box 8, I found my father's high school yearbook, full of notes from friends who had known him before he became our dad. Reading their messages, seeing his young face smiling from every page, I felt something I had not felt in 3 years. I felt connected to my past, to my family, to a history that had almost been lost. I found out later that Copper had been a stray who showed up at our grandfather's door about a year before he died. Grandpa had taken him in, fed him, named him for the color of his coat. They had become inseparable, 2 lonely souls keeping each other company. After our grandfather passed, the neighbors tried to care for Copper, but he kept running back to the empty house, waiting. He would sit on the porch for hours, looking down the road, as if expecting someone to come. He had been waiting for us. 6 months after the press conference on a warm spring evening, Sparrow and I sat on the newly repaired porch and watched the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink and purple. Copper lay at our feet. The tire swing swayed gently in the breeze. The rose garden, replanted in the same spot where our grandmothers had grown, was just beginning to bloom. "Do you think they're watching?" Sparrow asked. "Grandma and Grandpa? Mom and Dad?" The question deserved an honest answer. "I don't know, but I know they'd be proud." Sparrow nodded, leaning her head against my shoulder. "I carried so much rage," she said quietly, "for so long, at the system, at God, at everyone who failed us. I thought we were alone in the world. We weren't." "No," she smiled, and it was the smile I remembered from our childhood, before loss and grief had dimmed it. "We were loved. We just didn't know it." I put my arm around her and held her close. The sun sank below the mountains and the first stars began to appear. Somewhere in the distance an owl called and Copper's ears perked up, then relaxed. Home. The word had always felt foreign to me, a concept for other people, people with families and histories and places they belonged. But sitting on that porch, watching the night settle over the land my grandparents had protected, I finally understood. Home was not a building or a piece of land. It was not blood or money or legal documents. Home was knowing you were loved. Home was having something worth fighting for. Home was the choice to stay when walking away would have been easier. My grandfather once wrote in one of his many letters that the land does not belong to us. We belong to the land. I finally understood what he meant. 3 years ago, I lost my parents. 6 months ago, I lost my grandfather. 1 month ago, I lost everything I thought I knew about my life. And now, sitting on this porch with my sister and our dog, watching the stars come out over the mountains our family had protected for generations, I realized I had found something I never thought I would have. I found home, I found family, I found purpose. And I found the truth that my grandfather had been trying to tell us all along. That love does not disappear when people die. It does not get lost in the system or buried in paperwork or forgotten in the chaos of life. Love waits. Love endures. Love finds a way. All we have to do is come home. Thank you for being here with me and Sparrow through this whole journey. Your presence, your comments, your support, they mean more than you know. If this story touched you, if it made you feel something, I hope you'll subscribe and join this community. We share stories about hope, about second chances, about finding family in unexpected places. And I want to hear from you. What part of this story moved you the most? Have you ever discovered that someone loved you more than you knew? Have you ever found home after thinking you'd never have one? Share your stories in the comments, because we're all on this journey together. And remember, no matter how alone you feel, no matter how broken things seem, there is always hope. There is always love, even when you can't see it. There is always a chance for a new beginning. Until next time.